Hey guys, it's now time for us to talk about HTML input attributes. Okay, so what are the different attributes for an HTML input element? Okay, so when I talk about the HTML input element, I'm talking about this particular element here. What are the various attributes that you can use with this element? Now, let's first talk about the first attribute, which is going to be the value attribute. So the value attribute here is going to allow you to specify an initial value for your input field. For example, here we have this input text field, which is going to be used to capture the first name of the user, for example. By default, we don't have any initial value. What if you want an initial value? You're going to say value equal and say first name, for example. So when you say that first name, there you can see that first name is going to display by default here. Okay, you can do that for the second text field as well. Say value here, but we will say last name like this. Okay, so the value attribute is used to define or specify an initial value for an input field. So that's it. Another thing that we can talk about here would be the read-only attribute. If you say read-only here, what does it mean? So if you say read-only, it will mean that you want to specify that this particular input field is a read-only field. So a read-only input field cannot be modified. Okay, so here we can't modify this field. When I click on it, I can type. The second field here, I can modify that. Okay, but as for the first one, because I put read-only here, I cannot modify it because it is read-only. So however a user can highlight it, you can copy the text from it and all of that, but it cannot be modified. But you can just see what is displayed in the field. Okay, so, and also one thing you can note is that the value of a read-only field will be sent to the server when submitting the form. So that's the read-only. Another thing that we can talk about here would be the disabled. So instead of writing read-only here, if I write disabled, for example, what will happen? So the disabled attribute here will specify that an input field should be disabled. As you can see here, it is disabled. So a disabled input field is unusable, it is unclickable. You can't, click on it. Everything is grayed here. So the value of a disabled input field will not be sent to the server when submitting the form. So that's basically the difference between the read-only and the disabled. The read-only, you can highlight, you can click on the field and all of that, and when you submit, the value of a read-only field is going to be submitted. But as for the disabled one, you cannot click on the field, and then the value of a disabled field cannot be submitted to the server for processing. So that's something that you can note. Another thing that we can talk about, that's going to be the size attribute. Let's say, for example, here we want the size to be equal to 40. So if we say size 40 like this, it's going to increase the size. Okay, so the size attribute will specify the visible width in terms of characters, the width of an input field. And by default, the size of an input field is 20. So that's the default. But if you want more than 20, you can set that by using the size attribute. Okay, so the size attribute here will work mostly with the text type, the search type, the telephone type, the URL type, the email type, and the password type, and all of that. Let's talk now about the maximum length attribute. Okay, so the max length, so you write max length like this, equals, and then you can specify, let's say 5, for example. So the max length attribute will specify the maximum number of characters allowed in an input field. So when max length is set, the input field will not accept more than the specified number of characters. So let's say, for example, here we've said 5. So if I write more than 5 characters here, the field will not accept it. It will only accept 5 characters. So whenever I type more than 5 characters, you can see that these characters are not being added in the field because of the max length that we have set. Okay? That's how you can use the max length. Another attribute that we can talk about, that's going to be the minimum and the maximum attribute. So as for that attribute, we will use them with the input types of number, range, date, and date, local time, month, and all of that. So let's say, for example, here, instead of saying last name, we will simply say number. A number here. The type, we will say number, ID, number, name would be number as well. Okay, so when we say number like this, we can set the value. If we say the value is 20, for example, okay. Okay, so by default, we will have 20 here. What if we want to say that the maximum and the minimum, let's say the minimum number here must be 10, and the maximum will be equal to 25. Okay, so the input max and minimum attributes will specify the minimum and the maximum values for an input field. Okay, these, as I said, will work for inputs like number, for example. Here we can have another input type that will work with that, will be the range. For example, if you're working with range, okay. Now, the other thing that will work with the minimum and maximum would be date. The other dates as well. Date, time, local, the month type, the time type, the week type will also work with that. So let's say, for example, here we can say that the maximum is, so when I come to my number here, when I reach 25, I can't go, beyond 25. And when I come down, when I reach 10, I can't go lower than 10 because I set the minimum to be equal to 10 and the maximum be equal to 25. So as for the range as well, I can set the range, the same way. As for the date here, instead of doing that, but I will write the minimum here in terms of date. So I can say that the minimum would be 2014, for example, 01 for the month and 01 for the day. And here, the maximum, I can say that it is 2021 and 01. So when you come here, there you can see that I can't go, after 2021. There's no 2022, 2023 showing here because I set the max to be 2021. The same thing if I come to 2014, I can't go to 2013 and, because I set the minimum to be 2014. So that's how you can work with minimum, maximum. So this will also work with the input type, date, time, local, month, time, and week types. So that's it. Now let's talk about another input that we can talk about here. That's going to another attribute, that we can talk about. That will be the attribute multiple. So the multiple attribute is going to specify that the user is allowed to enter more than one value in an input field. And this multiple attribute will work with input types like email and files, for example. For example, if you want to upload some file to your system, you can tell the user to be able to upload more than one file, for example. Okay, or if you have a drop-down menu or a drop-down field, you may want your user to be able to select more than one option from that. Okay, so in order to do that, that's what we are going to have a look at. So we will say, for example, here we can allow our user to have multiple selections. Let's say we will use the select input, the select how do you call it, the select element. We can also use the multiple with that, but since here we are talking about input elements, so as for the input elements, the type of input element that will use the multiple attribute would be the type file, for example. Let me just copy this. Come down here. And if I remove this, so here I'll write file as the type of my input. The ID, I will say my file, and here I will say my file. Okay, so we are talking about the multiple attribute. So let me close the double quotes here. So if I write multiple here, so this is going to allow the user to select multiple files. Okay, so if you select 2 here, this will tell you that 2 files have been selected. If I remove multiple like this, let's see what will happen. I can choose only one. Okay, even when I click on control and try to select multiple files, I am not able to do that. I can only do it with one. But as soon as I add multiple attributes here, okay, it changes everything. I can be able, if I click on control and select multiple here, and when I add, there you can see it will tell me the number of files that I have selected, and all that. So that's basically the use of the multiple attribute. Okay, the next attribute that we can talk about here would be the attribute, the pattern attribute. Okay, the pattern attribute. This particular attribute is going to work with input types like text, date, search, URL, telephone type, email, and password. So let's say, for example, if you are working with tel type, and we say phone like this, and the name is going to be phone. And here we can add a pattern attribute. So we say pattern is equal to, and then here you can define the pattern like this, curly braces, hyphen. So this is a simple regular expression that you can define and all of that. All right, so the pattern attribute, the input pattern attribute, is going to specify a regular expression. So this is a regular expression that the input field's value is going to be checked against when the form is submitted. So, and as I was saying, that the pattern attribute will usually work with the text type, the date input type, the search input type, the URL input type, the tel input type, tel for telephone, like the one we are using here, the email input type, and the password input type. And inside, the value you assign to your pattern attribute is going to be a regular expression. So you need to know how to write regular expressions to do that. And here, if I say, like, I have my regular expression, if I don't respect, the regular expression, I'm going to get an error whenever I put my cursor. The error will tell me to respect the required format, okay, because I need to do that. So if I write the required format, then I will no longer get the error, okay? So that's basically that for this particular pattern attribute. Another one would be the placeholder attribute. So this placeholder attribute is used to specify a short hint that describes the expected value of an input field. So it's going to be a sample value or a short description of the expected format or the expected value that needs to go inside the field. So that short hint is going to be displayed in the input field before the user enters a value. And usually the placeholder attribute is going to work with input types like text, search, tel, email, and password, and all of that. So let's say that we are using this particular input, it's a text input type, and we want to use a placeholder for with that. So we will say placeholder equal, and we say write your first name here. See, now you can see that the message we have written here that we have assigned to the placeholder is going to appear in our field. Okay, so now when you start writing in the field, the whole placeholder text is going to disappear. So as I was saying, it's used, as a short hint. You can use that as a short hint to describe to the end user what value is expected in that particular field. Okay, so the next one, the next attribute that we can talk about is going to be the required attribute. So the required attribute, let me say here, if we write required like this is going to be used to specify that the input field must be filled before submitting the form. And this is going to also be working with so many other input types, like the search input, the email, the password, and all of that, to make sure that, for example, if a certain input needs to be filled out before sending your the data, you can use this particular required attribute. So when you use the required attribute, and if you do not fill out any information in the field, when you put your cursor on the field, there you can see error message telling you to actually fill out the field. So that's for the required text, the required attribute. All right, so quickly let's move on to the next attribute. That will be the step attribute. So this is another attribute that is used to specify the legal number interval for an input field. Okay, what needs to be the legal interval? So usually this is an input that is used with the input type number. Okay, so if we say number here, number as well, and we can say step and specify the step. So as I said, the step here is going to be the legal interval for the legal number intervals for an input field. Okay, and this is an attribute that can also be used together with the minimum and maximum attributes that the min and max attribute that we talked about earlier on. So it can be used with number input type, the range input type, the date, the month, the week, and the time input types. So as for example here, if we say step 5, so now you can see that the interval between the numbers is equal to 5. Okay. So you can go from 0 to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and moving upward. So that's basically what this step attribute does. Another one would be the autofocus attribute. So autofocus attribute is going to be used, let me come here with our text input type text, for example, and the autofocus attribute will specify that an input field should automatically get focus when the page loads. So if I say autofocus like this, so this is going to make sure that our first input field here will get focus when the page loads. All right, so that's another attribute that you can use in your page. Let's talk about another one that would be the width and the height. So as for the width and the height, This is usually for the input type image. Okay, so the input type image is used when you want to use an image as a submit button. Okay, let's say image here. Okay, I'll need to provide the source of the image, maybe the alternative text. So the source of the image, I may come here and simply copy the URL of this image, and then I can use these attributes, the height and width attribute, to determine the dimensions of the image. So width, I will say equal 100, height equals 100 as well. So there you can see I have specified the dimension of my image. All right, so let's talk about another input attribute. This will be about the list attribute. Okay, so the input list attribute is going to refer to a data list element that contains predefined options for an input. So let me remove all of this. We will say, for example, that we have our input here, and we will have a data list element with an ID, and here we will say cities. Let me close the data list, and inside the data list I will say option value. So these are going to determine, the list items. So I can say Paris, for example, and then I will simply add some items here, like this, like this again. And here I can change, so I'll say Michigan, Madrid. Okay, so what we are going to do here is that we will say that we are going to use this ID, and inside our input we will say list. So this is the attribute, and the list attribute needs to be equal to the ID of our data list. So we will say cities here. So they need to get the same value in order for us to connect our input with this data list. So when we do that, there you can see that when you click on the particular field, you have a drop down list here because we have linked. That's why the ID is important, and the list here needs to be equal to the ID of the data list. So that's basically how you can work with the list attribute. Here, for example, that's what I was saying, is that the list attribute refers to a data list element that contains predefined options for an input element. But in order to link the data list to the input, you need to make sure that the value assigned to the list attribute is equal to the value assigned to the ID of the data list. And then finally, another attribute that we can talk about is going to be the autocomplete attribute. For example, here, if we are having an email input type, for example, and we can set autocomplete. We can say here, so we can use that attribute. So in the attribute, we say autocomplete here, so that when you start writing your email, it's going to suggest, the information. You say autocomplete equals on. All right. So what autocomplete does is that it specifies whether a form or an input field should have autocomplete on or off. Okay, so here we've said autocomplete must be on. We could have said that we want it to be off, for example. But for the purpose of the video, we can say on. And autocomplete allows the browser to actually predict the value. So when you start typing, it's going to predict your value. And when the user starts to type in the field, the browser will automatically display options to fill in the field based on earlier typed values. So the autocomplete attribute is going to work with, with the form element here. You can actually write your autocomplete attribute in the form here and say it's on, or it can also work with the other input types, like the text type, the search type, the URL type, the tail type, the email, the password, the date pickers, the range, the colors, and all of that. It can work with all of the input types that I have just mentioned. So guys, we are going to stop here for this video. So these are some of the attributes that you need to keep in mind, that you can come across depending on the type of projects you'll be working on. And that's why I wanted to make the video on this one. So we have talked about some of the attributes that you can use with your input, your HTML input tags. Okay, the various types of HTML input tag. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comment section, and I will be more than willing to get back to you. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos like this one. Let's meet in the next one.